My name is Judy Thompson. I'm Chief Executive and founder of Bright Future Software, which is just over there. I want to ask you a question about branding, because I believe, I'm new to the area, and I do believe that Manchester, or Greater Manchester, does need branding. And I've attended very many meetings with very many important people in Greater Manchester where we've talked about this, and there seems to be some confusion. Is it a creative area? Is it a digital high-tech area? Is it software engineering? And I just think it's all digital. And I want to hear your views on how that's going on with the brand.
What I discovered when, because this was kind of the first dinner I attended of the Greater Manchester LEP, the first thing that came up that obviously had been rumbling for a while, and they were waiting for somebody who kind of got the brand thing to kind of chuck it out, was this thing that for a while was called narrative. And I don't think most people even understood what narrative, but it just become known as the narrative problem. And so I think that was probably writ large. If you went to something like MIPIM, which fortunately I never had to go to, and there were lots of brochures, and everybody's going, well, this brochure, you know, this isn't the future. We want to be a digital city. We should be doing so this kind of problem that actually Sir Howard raised as a right. Let's get this sorted. And the answer to most things at a level I've now learned is you begin by writing a paper. So I've learned to write papers, and those papers seem to take a very long time to circulate. But what is starting to happen is, I suppose first thing is get people to acknowledge the problem, you know, because people get very sensitive. You know, we have a whole marketing organisation, and you know they have limited budgets. So you can't just kind of point the finger at Marketing Manchester and go, it's all your fault, you know, because they've been a tourism marketing organisation. You know, what's their role in marketing a sector or a business strand? So I think first of all, just everybody accepting there is a problem, which now certainly in those quarters there's definitely an acknowledgement that that's an issue. Then the question is, what do you do about it? So we wrote another paper, and everybody agreed, yes, we needed to do something quite radical and probably digital. So there's a piece of work going on now within the city where lots of different stakeholders and opinion formers and you know lots of people engaged in that industry are helping to contribute to two pieces of work. Because what's happened is people then, as you said, blur all those things into one. So there is the marketing of the creative digital / tech sector, whatever we're going to call it. That's one thing. Then there is telling the whole story of the city, which should be done through digital media, because why would we not? But they're not the same thing. They'll probably overlap at some point. So again, we've now written a paper on that, and everybody understands they're two different things and they need two different work streams. So I think, but what's also happening that's really, really interesting to me, and probably, you know, you need public sector engagement. That's really important because you don't want resistance, but you also need the role of private enterprise, I think sometimes can be to make things happen and hopefully do that symbiotically with the public sector, but not always. And so, you know, what the private sector can do very well is activate things pretty quickly. And there are lots of, you know, fairly high net worth individuals in the city who've made their money through tech or, you know, through industries where tech was involved in the success of that, who really want to see something positive happen and are getting frustrated with being in London, there being a very strong narrative in London, and there being a kind of patchy thing where, you know, you meet one or two individuals like, you know, Doug Ward and those who are a brilliant poster child for, you know, the tech sector and but it's all a bit patchy. So there is also another project which is really exciting that a lot of those people have got together and gone, right, we're going to do something about this. So I think what I'm starting to see in the limited bit I see is lots of different pockets of things popping up that go, we've got to sort this out. Probably half of them won't work, but if half of them do, that's enough, you know. So I think born out frustration, people are going to grapple it. But you're right, we've got to then explain that tech runs through everything, creative and digital is a sector, and generally as a whole, the city needs a brand and that needs to be digitally led, and they're three entirely different things. I do think the message is finally kind of getting through, but...
I was going to ask about recruitment, which I think is quite apropos to Mortimer Spinks. And just sort of when you asked your question about what men can do, it's called to mind something I've seen that Future Media did a study, and obviously it's known that people hire in their likeness, you can't help it, and most of future media, more than 75% is male. So if you were at a panel with 2 or 3 people, oftentimes those will all be men, and I think they were kicking around whether sometimes you don't get, whether you get a woman to just come on the panel. And I was just wondering what your perception was of recruitment, if how women show when they come forward for jobs, if that sort of lack of confidence that we often talk about comes through when you're recruiting, or if they still manage to shine in interview panels, and maybe shaft you whether you think it is a issue if there isn't a woman on the panel when you're interviewing.
I think yes. I think it's really important to have a diverse panel when you're interviewing any new recruits. I think it's an easy thing to do when you're hiring someone and you know oh, you went to the same school as me, or you went to the same university as me. Oh well, therefore that sticks in your head, that kind of thing. So I think it's definitely. I think I don't quite know the answer to that, to be quite honest. I know that it's a problem. I think maybe it's an answer that Mortimer Spinks can offer. I don't know. One thing I would like to mention is probably women technologists don't value their skills as much as male technologists do. For example, I was talking the other evening to Viv Slack, who did a talk at 300 seconds, and I've worked with Viv at Code Computer Love, and she is an insanely intelligent developer. She's all about the lateral thinking. She's fantastic, and if I had her skills, I'd be walking around like the man. I'd be telling everyone how good I am, and but she doesn't. She's incredibly humble, too humble. So I think that's a problem.
Really subtle things like language, and I remember somebody from years and years ago that I met who was running Ogilvy Interactive in New York, and she was like a force. She'd been through this male-dominated world and just kind of elbowed her way through. And should you watch a man give a presentation, and they'll have read a book, and this is a massive sweeping a sexist generalisation, but it's not my words, I'll tell you the story, and it does make you think. And should a man read a book and go, that's a really interesting thought, and they'll stand up and they'll go, you know what, and they'll present the thought. A woman will read the book and they'll go, I read this really interesting book the other day by this person, and they said, and so it's that confidence of, I've read the thought, therefore I've thought the thought, versus I've read the thought, and actually, isn't that person really clever that they had that thought, so, and I think, and those aren't conscious, they're just kind of what we grew up with, but I think if you've got a strong mentor, somebody can point those things out and say, interview, you come across like this, or don't, or be a bit more confident, or actually go for that job, you'd be perfect for it. So I do think having, we can bridge some of that gap with other people who have faith in you, even if you don't have faith in yourself, or teaching people how to kind of present themselves, if it is going to be an all-male panel, how do you engage with that panel if you really want that job,
Can I just add, I suppose it's one of the things it links back to earlier on, when you said, what can we actually do? And it's about being conscious. Because actually some of the businesses that we speak to, realistically, if you put a female techie in front of them, in a way, there's kind of like that positive bias. They'll actually probably more likely employ the woman, even if she's not necessarily as good at the job, because she'll bring something else, that diversity. So I think it's about being aware as a female that actually, on paper, you might not necessarily have exactly the same skills or match up, but you bring a different dynamic. And if you look at the organisation as a whole, and also who's the target audience for that organisation? If you look at the population, then actually what you're bringing in your gender will help that organisation, especially if there's not a lot of other women in the company as well.